I think there's kind of 4 distinct eras, if you like, of brand and marketing. The first one was...
Damn, dude, this is a lot to unpack.
Josh Sparks is a leading strategist to designer and lifestyle brands. He was the former CEO of Tom Browne New York and Sass & Bide, as well as the managing director of Anthropologie e-commerce.
In the AI economy, execution is cheap and ideas are priceless.
He has architected some of the most exciting growth stories in the fashion and lifestyle sector for over 20 years. Josh currently serves as a retained strategic advisor to the CEOs of MJ Bale, who is Elijah, Natalie Marie Jewelry, Sir the Label, and is a partner to Rival Strategy and Brand Advisory Practice.
There's this Buddhist concept, which is growth, maintenance, destruction, and it's a continuous cycle. When you launch anything, there's a period of intense growth. It gets to a point of maturity where it's largely about maintenance. Now, to get back to growth, you've got to go through a destruction phase. That freaks everyone out.
What happens that a brand could wrestle 20 million for a year, 2, 3, 5 years, and then get this enormous valuation in the market?
Well,
welcome to the podcast.
what an
Josh.
introduction. That's a mouthful, isn't it? I've got to try to work out how to get that a little tighter.
Well, you have a complicated resume that's difficult to put in a power statement. That's the best we can do. And I think for you, this is quite a unique episode. So we've had you on as, well, our relationship started off with you coming on the podcast for the first time.
Yes.
Back when it was the Target Table.
Yes.
And then we started having conversations and coffees, and then we ended up working together. I approached you for consulting. You're very expensive, but we got a tremendous amount of value out of that. And then that's transformed into a partnership.
Yeah.
So what I want to cover on today's episode is some of the stuff you've been teaching me over the last 10 months, I've felt have been groundbreaking revelations for me. And you've been able to answer some questions that I've gone to some of the biggest thought leaders in branding and marketing that they couldn't answer. And you were like, oh yeah, that's just X, Y, Z. So I guess to kick things off regarding where you kind of stand in the market, what's your opinion on the difference between sales, marketing, advertising, and branding?
Great question. So they overlap, they interact, they're mutually, they're codependent. At the same time, they have an independent purpose and they create value in independent ways. So another way of saying that is, whilst we can look at each of those in a silo, I think it's more useful to think about how they interact and support each other in more of a flywheel, or as you like to think of it, an infinity loop. So different elements of each support the next element and it loops around in terms of creating a value flywheel. So a brand, if we think about breaking it down though, so a brand is at its core a promise. And ultimately what a brand, and you could say, well, what's the promise? That's dependent on the company itself and what the founder and leadership of the company perceive as their vision of a better life. So effectively the brand is the means through which we articulate and we distill and communicate our version of a better life. So for example, it could be that I will feel more empowered, I will feel more creative, I will feel sexier, I will feel smarter, I will feel richer, more powerful. I will be able to demonstrate to myself and those around me that I have certain attributes and I want to convey those to the world. So I use the brand to reinforce my sense of self, who I really want to be at my best, and I use it as a means of communicating to the rest of the world what that best self looks like. So if we think about that as a promise, then how do we bring that promise to life? So marketing, whether we're talking sort of top funnel brand level, mid funnel kind of campaign level, or bottom funnel kind of call to action performance marketing, they're all elements of how we create a narrative that progressively moves someone from first encounter and awareness of the brand with the decision to become a member of that brand's community. So marketing is the means through which we both create the narrative that conveys the brand promise and we evolve that narrative over time. So if you think of the brand as the hero in the story, and that hero is off on a quest to conquer demons and evolve and ultimately self-actualize as a better version of him or herself, marketing is the narrative that propels the hero on that journey. So it describes how the brand comes to life in your personal reality and how ultimately you're going to benefit from partnering with the brand. Sales is where we ultimately end up. So at the bottom of that funnel, at the end of that narrative, once we've taken the customer or potential customer on a journey, we've engaged them, we've inspired them, we've educated them, there's some composite of that mix. And ultimately they're at a point where they're ready to become a member of your community as the brand owner, then sales is what tips them over the edge. So that's a composite of performance marketing at the very bottom of the funnel, and then typically some more proactive sales activity as well. But if we think about brand really as it's a magnet, and brand and marketing I think are misunderstood in many ways. I'll just give you two examples. A brand really serves to pull customers into the community. It's a very, very powerful magnet in terms of creating attention, inspiration, education, as I mentioned, and pulling people towards your community. As you move down the marketing funnel, then the consumer or potential consumer is more ready for a little bit of a push. And that's where we get to the bottom of the funnel with performance marketing and sales. But like in any relationship, personal relationship, business relationship, friendship, romantic, whatever it is, if it's all about push and no pull, it can feel a bit violent. It's not necessarily, it's not a fun process. And I would argue that many so-called brands are really product and service companies that are offering a product price combination and relying on a lot of push. And they are unfortunately not taking the huge advantage of pull at the brand level. I think they're also a little misunderstood in so much as in the modern economy, I can work out the physical attributes that make up your product or the time and motion associated with the service and fairly accurately price it. So I can go onto the internet and find products like yours or services like yours and scour the globe for similar offers. And ultimately that will give me a good sense of what the price range looks like. Absent brand and marketing to support my decision, I will typically make my decision on price and promo because there are a lot of products in any given category and a lot of them actually offer a lot of the same benefits if we're completely honest. So my ability and my desire to spend 5x, 8x, 10x, 15x the cost of production boils down to brand and marketing. So when people think about brand and marketing, they often think about it as a way of conveying or communicating what you're ultimately purchasing. I would argue that brand and marketing are critical value pillars of the offer itself. And in fact, when you look at the physical attributes that comprise the cost of my shoes or my watch or my glasses, or the time and motion involved in the service provided by the various service providers that I utilize, it's actually a very small component of the cost. Could be 10%, could be 20%, maybe 30% the most. So in other words, the other 70, 80% is some combination of other elements of the customer experience. A large component of that is brand and marketing. Another component could be that it's through a distribution partner and they need to make their margin. So I could be selling wholesale to a retailer. So I'm not saying it's all brand and marketing for the other 80, 90%, but a large component of it is. And the proof of that, of course, is that the value of a brand sits on your balance sheet in your intangible assets. So brand is one of the very few investments we can make that improves the efficiency of marketing and sales. So increases the ROI that impacts your P&L and your cash flow. But then in and of itself becomes an asset, an enduring asset that for many businesses is the most valuable asset they have. So when we look at the $1 trillion valuations of various companies out there and the many, many, many companies in premium consumer goods, services, software, et cetera, the physical attributes of what they're doing it's a very small component of their value. There's a people layer, there's a real estate layer, there's an infrastructure layer, there's a distribution layer, et cetera, et cetera. But the value of the brand, I mean, I guess if you're unsure whether you believe me or not, just go and read the balance sheets, the financial statements of the biggest brands in the world and see how the value of their assets is largely composed of the value of their brand. So they're distinct, but they support each other, and they support each other in terms of propelling the customer journey, maximizing post-purchase loyalty, inclination to referral, lifetime value, all that good stuff. But they're also interlinked in the sense that the way they impact your financial statements. So I would say that from my perspective, brand is the greatest single investment that you can make. In terms of optimizing the value of that, clearly marketing is incredibly important. Sales is incredibly important. Customer experience at the retail level, at the service suite level is very important. So they're all important, but ultimately the value is most optimally distilled in brand.
So if someone's looking at their organization, you and my team have created this Venn diagram, which we can put up on the screen, which is there's kind of three spheres and they overlap. One being, which you've talked about, is, I guess, the marketing domain, which is directly correlated to your profit and loss. So we can unpack that in just a moment. Then you have a second sphere, which is sales, which directly correlates to cash flow. And then you're saying that brand is essentially on the balance sheet. So can you explain each of those spheres and how they overlap, and starting with marketing, then sales, then branding?
Sure. So I think it really starts with brand. So we might start with brand and then move around. Well, in my perspective, great businesses start with brand. Because when we're looking at marketing, the question that we always ask is in service of what? And there's two components to that. Does this act in service of our brand? Is this marketing opportunity, wherever it sits in the funnel, ultimately reinforcing brand promise or not? There's lots of tactical marketing opportunities that you will come across as a business owner or leader that may be interesting in and of themselves, but are neutral at best in terms of how they reinforce brand, and ultimately might undermine brand. And we can think of simple examples: discounting, off-price opportunities, partnerships with businesses or distributors that are not on brand. So I'd start with brand.
Do you have an example of undermining branding? Like maybe if we talk to fashion, because you've worked in the world with Ralph Lauren, Tom Browne, etc. Maybe an example that people might know of, like what's something that they could do that would drastically inhibit or hurt their brand or undermine what they do?
So I think an over-reliance of performance marketing and the discounting offers and promotions that are associated with performance marketing is a really simple example.
And what do you mean by performance marketing exactly?
So performance marketing is that within the trade we call bottom of the funnel. So it is typically these days largely social and digital. And that is the kind of offers you see where it's your 2-for-1, 30% off. It's typically associated with some blend of price and promo that you are distilling the offer down to kind of lowest common denominator terms to push someone over the edge to purchase. Now, when I was really fortunate, I know I've spoken about this with you before, so forgive me for repeating myself, but I was very fortunate to spend some time with Ralph. And he summarized branding for me as deposits and withdrawals. So I would say that discounting and promotions is not necessarily going to undermine your brand. It is a withdrawal of brand equity. So therefore, it's only going to not undermine it if you put in enough deposits. So what do I mean by that? In Ralph's world, deposits are things like the mansion on Madison in New York City. It's the runway shows. It's the catwalk shows. It's the celebrity events. It's dressing celebrities at the Met Gala. It is being product placement within film and film clips. It is everything that reinforces the lifestyle that he is associating with the brand, the promise that you can, if you aspire to that, you can participate in that through partnering with his brand. That basically is the Ralph Lauren brand promise in a grossly simplified form. So for Ralph to sell polo shirts in Bloomingdale's in New Jersey at 30% off, when he has that level of brand equity, he can sell an awful lot of polo shirts at 30% off before anyone starts to question brand integrity. So I would say it's a bit more nuanced than saying an over-reliance on bottom of the funnel is a problem. It is a problem for those who don't balance that with top of the funnel, brand supportive, brand equity building marketing.
We see that happen with retail where they just get stuck in this cycle of being on sale forever and always. Like I always think of like like rug commercials where they're always 2 for 1
Closing
or
down sale.
50% off
Again.
or closing. They're always closing down. They have been closing down for 15 years. But you're saying at a certain point, if the scale tips too heavily into that, that's what your brand becomes known for: a discount shop, a box with offers, and it's losing its equity or its impression in the market.
Well, it's absolutely. So first of all, yes to your question, and just to nuance it out a little bit more, you don't really have a brand if you're reliant primarily on price and promotion. What you have is a product or service, and you are competing on some level of convenience, price, speed of delivery. These are all kind of head offers, right? So these are all things that when I'm looking for rational reasons to believe, rational reasons to partner with your organization, it appeals to my prefrontal cortex. As we know from about 30 years of study, all decisions, not just purchasing decisions, all decisions are made in the limbic system. They're emotional decisions first that we then justify rationally. So if we're not taking advantage of the power of that system with messages that are meant to move you on an emotional level, then we're really missing a trick, because we are then at that point competing on a set of attributes that frankly anyone can compete on. So the real winners in any category have a brand that stands for a higher purpose, a better life, that promise of a better tomorrow that every brand, every great brand encapsulates, such that when they are speaking to that bottom of the funnel, you've already decided you want to engage. And that's why it's a very gentle push. When a brand hasn't created that sense of awareness of the lifestyle promise, the aspiration that you represent, and kind of stirred you through some emotionally engaging content, then it takes a bit more of a push. You're going to be resistant to that because you're up in the head. You're looking for reasons not to purchase rather than reasons to purchase at that point in time. You're much more likely to price compare and shop around. You're much less likely to have an impulse purchase for something that is price and promo and convenience driven. Because if you're up in the prefrontal cortex and you're looking for best price, greatest promotion, most money off, fastest delivery, I mean, these days that's one click away. So you really want to be in a position as a brand owner or leader that your customer, they're looking for reasons to buy, that they want to believe, they want to engage, they want to be part of your community, such that when you are at the bottom of the funnel, occasionally you need an offer, most of the time you don't. It's more about that you've created such aspiration at the top of the funnel, you've provided it within context, you've made it real. Mid-funnel is all about making it real. So campaign level assets, how does this manifest in the world? That is these days somewhat brand driven and directed, but there's also a big UGC component to that. Your community is doing the selling for you. So that when we're at the bottom of the funnel, it's a very gentle push.
Now, with the brand being the balance sheet piece, just break down what you mean by branding showing up on the balance sheet. How does it do that? What impact does it have on my business? We've talked about this. If someone's looking for an exit or a valuation, it can very much show up and become a force multiplier for that. Can you unpack that?
Sure. So the brand, and I realize I probably just didn't answer your last question very well. So maybe I'll start answering this one by answering the last one better.
No, you're doing great. This is fascinating. I'm loving these little segues. But
So brand isn't solely on the balance sheet, and marketing and sales aren't solely kind of P&L.
They all overlap a little bit.
They overlap like Venn diagrams. So brand directs and accelerates and propels marketing. It makes marketing more efficient and effective because you've really got someone excited and engaged by the time they're engaging with your marketing. So it's a terrible word and we overuse it, but it optimizes marketing. It ensures that marketing hits as hard as it can because you've got someone who is effectively pre-qualified, if we want to use a sales term. Someone has identified themselves through engagement with the brand as being receptive to the marketing. The marketing then supports and leads to a sales outcome, which may or may not involve distinct selling as opposed to just marketing. So certain transactions occur really just as the result of great marketing and the customer's making the decision online. certain activities will get you into store and there's still a human sales interaction at the end. It could be a car dealership, it could be a telco store, it could be a fashion retailer, whatever. So there's nuance, but ultimately the brand optimizes marketing. Marketing leads to a sales opportunity at the lowest possible cost. Great marketing does. And then that feeds through to more money to invest in brand.
So you can do more deposits, like you were saying. Ralph Lauren does this. He'll put millions of dollars into a runway, purely just to have celebrities present and become the talk of town.
Yes.
Right? That's a deposit. Or you might invest in a campaign that really touches on a certain point. For example, I understand that your mentor, Charlie Baker, is very involved at Nike, and he was around back when Nike were doing stuff with Michael Jordan and Serena Williams and so forth. But it's this deposit into a community, deposit into the zeitgeist of people's psychology of what this brand means.
Yeah.
And by making these deposits, you're investing in your equity, kind of inflating or growing it and making it more valuable.
Yeah, exactly. And so that virtuous loop of brand marketing sales,
Never ending.
Ultimately adds to the objective, not just subjective, but the objective measures we use to look at true brand equity. And that brand equity is, people think brand equity is a marketing term.
Okay.
It sits on the balance sheet. It has a dollar value. And why is that important? Brands that are at the top of the table in any given sector, call it the top 2 or 3 in any given sector. And again, I would encourage listeners to go and just do their own research if there's any questions in their mind around this. Their brand valuation is significantly higher. And to the extent that they are valued publicly, that's simple. You just look at what their multiple of earnings is, their price earnings ratio.
Right. So if I have a company that's making $100 million a year, the brand is super valuable, we could get, a 40x or a 50x or whatever on that.
Well,
is that what you're talking about?
In technology, you can. In product categories, 40 to 50x would be very, 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 very high. Yeah, very, very, very high. But you can still get multiples of revenue rather than multiples of profit. So when there's lots of different ways to value a business, and we won't go down that rabbit hole too much. But if we're talking about the premium consumer space, so-called brands that really haven't yet demonstrated that they have true kind of best in class, again, another cliche, I apologize, but sort of that they occupy the number 1, 2, 3 slot in their space, and that they can demonstrate pricing power. They're not dependent on some level of discounting or convenience to drive the bulk of their transactions. The bulk of their transactions occur at full price. They are minimally participating in promos, discounting, convenience-based offers. Then we can start to ascribe a higher valuation to brand. And an enterprise value, when you look at an exit situation, selling the business, brands that have demonstrated they have true brand equity, and we'll get to how you demonstrate that in a second, can sell for, do sell for multiples of revenue rather than multiples of profit. So I'll give you an example. If, and Tom Browne, this is public information, so I'm not talking out of school, but when Tom was valued at $500 million by Xenia, he was doing substantially less than that in revenue. And I'm not actually sure if the exact number is public, so I'm going to be careful here.
Let's talk a little bit about this because
whereas if you looked at the exit valuation of a brand like Tom Browne versus the exit valuation of Men's Suit Warehouse, they will attract a valuation based on cash flows, perhaps on a discounted cash flow basis, or on a multiple of their profit, or in Australia we use EBITDA more often than profit. So let's put that in perspective. Let's say your average fashion brand, well-run fashion brand, is generating 15% in EBITDA. In fact, we'll make the maths easy and we'll be really generous and say it's 20%. So if you're doing 100% in sales and 20% in EBITDA. Now, very few fashion brands are doing 20% in EBITDA in Australia right now, but let's be generous. You would typically expect a multiple for a business that has some runway left for growth, but not a super strong brand. Now, what do I mean by super strong brand? They can't demonstrate true pricing power. They're really in a pack with a bunch of others in terms of price. They're competing. There's a lot of bottom of funnel activity going on. And their permission to play, in other words, their customers' propensity to join them on a journey into other categories. So I'm doing women's dresses, Do I have permission to play in eyewear? Do I have permission to play in handbags? Could I go into shoes? Could I move into another geography? These are all indicia that we look at to say, is there true brand equity here?
Right. So if a brand is super popular and there's demand, we just wish you did glasses.
Yeah.
Then we might be able to line extend into that. But if there's not a massive impression or demand, then the brand doesn't have much value yet in that sphere.
Because it's really associated with a product and a price. So ultimately, if I think of a brand, if you ask me to think of a brand and my response is, yeah, they do really good women's dresses for kind of your, younger sort of out and about kind of girl at $300, then in my mind, I've got no background in brand or marketing. I'm just giving you an honest assessment of what I think about when I think about that brand. If the response from your target customer, those that aren't educated on brand and marketing and haven't read every single thing you've ever written, but they're just interacting with the brand occasionally, as most customers do, if they say it's about product and price, you don't really have a brand. If they speak to, look at Zimmerman.
Yeah.
So when I was CEO of Sass & Bide, Zimmerman was smaller than Sass & Bide, and it was a contemporary women's fashion brand. Those girls were as were Sarah Jane Hardy at Sass & Bide, but the Zimmerman girls had a vision to turn that into a global designer brand, a very bold and audacious vision based on where they were at the time. And
for context, where were they at the time?
Like 20 odd million turnover. Now, they ultimately exited for multiple billions. They are around the world now. They're globally distributed. They're in multiple categories. And they've done something extraordinary, which they have maintained an assortment that still starts around about the price point that was the top of their range previously, whilst progressively move into higher price points and move from contemporary to designer. That's super hard. So
rarely do people move up the food chain.
It's very difficult.
Usually they topple down.
Yeah, and there's actually a legitimate strategy to moving down. Like sometimes it's a fall because I for whatever reason
we can't move the
we've
product.
Lost credibility.
Let's go down a rank. Yeah.
But there is actually a credible from watches, cars, fashion. There is a credible strategy to diversifying price point and moving to a greater range, but it's very hard to go up.
Okay, so Zimmerman were going up.
They pulled off a whole bunch of things that I actually think they're extraordinary. The Zimmerman girls have done something that I think we see very, very rarely in any category. You have seen it in a few others that we're all very familiar with. The permission of play that. What Steve Jobs did with Apple, which is obviously now a well-worn example and it's overused in our world and all the rest of it. But if we step back and think about it, I've been an Apple consumer since I was 14, and the Macintosh was what I convinced my parents to buy, even though the IBM clone was, a fifth of the price. I bought into that marketing early. I'm super old, so I remember their original 1984 commercial.
Think different.
Yeah, think different. It was
Challenge
awesome.
the status quo.
It was awesome. And I truly believe that I would be some sort of creative superpower if I used an Apple computer versus an IBM Microsoft clone.
And the specs were almost the same.
More or less. And in many ways, the Apple was more difficult to use. The GUI was better, the user interface was better, but the suite of software available was much more limited. They just weren't, the ecosystem wasn't as big. So
it's a great example of battle of the brands. David versus Goliath. In 1984, Steve Jobs was tiny. IBM were massive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Apple, as we know, had a whole bunch of financial issues. And so anyway, we won't go down that rabbit hole. But for those who have grown up with the iPhone and who weren't there when it was released. I was a BlackBerry kid. I had they called it a Palm Pilot that was a sort of a really lightweight pocket computer before that. I was sort of an early adopter of the multifunctional, what we would now call smartphone. But no one conceived of just how powerful this device could be. And Apple was a computer maker. Everyone else in the space had come up through the telco side.
Oh, so, I see. Like Nokia, Motorola.
So permission to play was not obvious. If it was obvious, then larger, better capitalized and better resourced computer competitors would have gone there first. So my point is that when we think about brands and permission to play in new categories, Apple managed what is something very rare, and I've given you a local example in Australia with Zimmerman, which was to become something more in the minds of the consumer than an association with the product and the price point within which they launched. And they came to represent a lifestyle. Obviously, Zimmerman and Apple are completely different, but we could go on. I could keep giving examples of brands, what not the brand in inverted commas. You know, everyone thinks they have a brand, but they've really got a product and a price point and a consumer that's interacting. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's nowhere near as valuable as a brand. Brands and how we test whether you've truly got a brand. One of the traditional indicators is price elasticity. One of the more meaningful indicators now in a global economy and a digital economy and the attention economy is, do I have permission to play beyond my initial domain? So I've planted a flag, I own this turf, I've become famous for doing this one thing. Does the customer think of me as this one thing? Or does the customer think of me as representing a higher purpose that this one thing is just one example of? And then it'll be a second thing and a third thing. And maybe I move from Australia to the United States to Europe, or maybe I go global. And to take the customer on that journey requires a real affinity and affiliation with the brand. And that's an emotional affiliation. So that's the power of great brand. And I know I've gone all over the map here, but you can simplify this diagrammatically.
Yeah.
And the Venn diagram that you just spoke to is one way to do that. But ultimately, there's a lot of nuance that lies behind that. There's exceptions to every rule, but it's great to think of brand as pull. You're pulling the customers in. You're creating a community that they're voluntarily joining. And that's sort of top funnel. Mid funnel is more, how am I making it real? How am I manifesting it in their reality? What are examples of how they would use this on a day-to-day basis? So traditionally that was campaign assets, seasonal type campaign, new product release, and we'd see it out in the wild and this is how you're using it and these guys are having fun and isn't it cool? These days it's as much community and UGC driven as it is brand driven. And we'll talk about monologue versus dialogue versus co-create later.
No, I'm fascinated by that and I'm excited to deep dive on that. But I think one thing I just want to, I guess, weave together here is with Zimmerman.
Yeah.
So to take a label from 0 to 20 million is a monumental task.
Yeah.
However, you see brands hit 20 and then all of a sudden they're $500 million.
Yo, my name's Dane Walker and I am disgustingly obsessed with branding. I had to figure out a way to do branding every single day, so I branded myself. Then, I started my agency, Rival. And hired a team of branding mavericks hell-bent on creating brands so good that they'll make your competition shit their pants. So here's the thing, you want your brand to go viral and Rival makes brands go viral. That's why we're offering you a free 30-minute branding session to get an expert's opinion. If you don't believe me, the proof is in the pudding. Here's what clients have to say about Rival.
Rival is trusted by brands like Nutrition Warehouse, Light My Bricks, and Vumi.
So if you want to absolutely smoke the competition and make your brand go viral, hit the link below and book in your free 30-minute branding session.
What happens that a brand could wrestle 20 million for a year, 2, 3, 5 years, and then get this enormous valuation in the market?
Well, it doesn't happen overnight. It's
Absolutely not. But
it's one of those cliches.
You see it kind of like a graph. It's like it's tracking with like a 20-degree incline, and then it goes 70%.
It's a hockey stick. So so we'll talk about the hockey stick. I think a lot of these brands that we talk about, and because we don't pay a lot of attention, what we think is an overnight success that took 20 years. So it looks like an overnight success.
But it looks like it.
Yeah,
it
exactly.
Definitely isn't. Yeah.
So it's good to note that because we do meet entrepreneurs, both of us in our work here at Rival, that drop things like, I want to be 200 million in 3 years. And I'm selling a physical product that needs to be made.
And they're 14 years in and they're scratching 10.
And it's like, okay, I love the ambition. And eventually you can get a hockey stick, but the foundations have to be in place. It's not as true of digital delivery. Like if you're doing software as a service or you've got a product that's capable of digital delivery, the right once, run anywhere, old cliche from Microsoft and everything we've seen since with software as a service and apps and everything else. Clearly, the hockey stick timeframe can be compressed.
Right, because you can just download it anywhere. You don't need logistics or delivery or
exactly.
what have you. Yeah.
There's no physical componentry that has to be put together somewhere that needs to scale.
So if I have a business that's built on physical componentry, how does one start to create the foundation to one day have the possibility of having that kind of scale of success?
Well, it's a well, God, that's a big question. Clearly, you need to create the demand. So everything we're talking about with Browne and marketing, you need the capital stack. Obviously, a big component of that is cash flow and self-funding, but capital stack meaning some level of equity, external equity, and/or debt. And you need to make really smart investments in middle and back office. So what I mean by that, back office, or what we traditionally call back office, is everything from your suppliers to your means of production to your supply chain to your logistics, et cetera, et cetera. Middle office is all your the financial team, the HR team, the operations team, the systems, the technology you utilize, et cetera, et cetera. So the temptation for any founder, and I've been a founder a few times, so like I get it, where we're all somewhere on the ADHD spectrum. We all want it done immediately. Sure. And sometimes it's a little bit frustrating to learn that even if we are hyper successful in terms of our brand and marketing, if we're delivering a physical product, there are step changes in terms of the factors of production. Simple example, you will work with small factories when you start. Why? Because the large factories aren't interested in working with you unless you're ordering hundreds of thousands or millions of units. At a certain point in time, you will fully exploit the capacity of that small factory. You now need to move to a new factory. That doesn't happen instantly. There's a handover process. You have to start it ahead of the actual handover.
There's a bit of a canyon between.
You test and learn because every factory makes things slightly differently. You want to ensure quality is either the same or better as you move to a bigger factory. That's going to distract middle and back office from other functions. There's an opportunity cost in all these investments. So it's a process, and it requires, I mean, I know I'm a broken record on this, but you need great strategy. You need true strategic clarity. You need an executive team and external stakeholders like board, investors, et cetera, but an executive team that is truly aligned. And that's often where these things get unstuck, actually. And then you need to have a level of competence. And so I talk about, capability, capacity, and consistency at the tactical level so that you can offer tactical autonomy to great people to get on with it. Otherwise, you're micromanaging, and you can't micromanage. Very, very difficult to micromanage a $10 million business. Imagine that at 10 or 100 or 1,000x. So your strategic clarity is critically important, but the executive team through which you direct that. There's another cliche it's worth throwing out there though. As a CEO, you lead the team runs the business. Now, if you don't have that level of clarity on what your role is as CEO, and you are constantly diving into the tactical level, either because you just have an obsession with meddling or you think you know everything better than everyone else, then that's kind of partly on you, and it could partly be on the team. It could be an absence of strategic clarity that the team are running off the rails. So it's like, well, do they know the rails? The team are off the map. It's like, well, have you framed the map? Do they have milestones? Do they have KPIs? Do we have systems for monitoring and managing their performance against those KPIs? So there's a lot that goes into it. So to answer your question, to scale and eventually achieve that hockey stick, there's a truckload of groundwork that has to happen under the covers such that you and I look at it from afar and go, wow, that looked easy. And it wasn't.
Definitely not the case.
the duck underwater, paddling underwater. Last thing I'd say is that the hockey stick is about network effects. So, think of compound interest. So in any investment, you continue making that small investment over time and results compound. Now, that's easy to understand conceptually. It's really hard to do in reality because people are inconsistent and they get distracted. They chase the new shiny toy. They get bored. And I would say no one is as guilty of that as entrepreneurs, including myself, because you get really excited about something. You start to create some proof points. It reaches a level of success where maybe some of you scratch that itch a little bit, and then someone's got a new idea. And it's like, wow, look over there. That looks like fun. So just that consistent application is critical to enjoy the compound growth and all the benefits that accrue from that, including the growth, the revenue line that looks like a hockey stick.
Yeah. And on that point, over the last 10 months that we've been working together, now we're partnered, is the biggest issue I was having personally was just shiny object syndrome, which I was like, okay, I want to write another book. I'm going to do a course. I'm going to speak on the stage. And you were saying, look, like, what is the opportunity cost when you're away from this company?
Yeah.
And we had multiple meetings where we're seriously contending with like, what is that actual number? And you're saying that in most cases with entrepreneurs is when they're trying to create greater capacity, they're trying to be more consistent, and they're trying to, engineer their company to have that hockey stick moment.
Yeah.
That the biggest distraction, if you will, is them not just focusing on compounding what already works.
Yeah.
Versus trying to jump on this new trend or this new tactic or what have you, which brings to mind a quote that I texted you last night from Ryan Holiday from a book I was reading. And it said that, discipline is all about, it's impossible to have discipline without wisdom.
Yeah.
And the wisdom of knowing what to choose to be disciplined at. And you're saying to grow a company, you have to be ruthlessly disciplined on a couple key functions. Otherwise, you're never going to have the hockey stick moment.
100%. So I would say that first of all, I completely agree with everything you just said. I recall beautifully our very first
meeting. You can touch
meeting.
on it if you need to. Because there was moments where I was having, not a crisis, but I was just like rewriting every frame of thought that I had about how to build this company.
Yeah.
In a healthy way.
Very, very common. So I think, the same qualities that provided you with the conviction that you had something new and better to offer the world, and the inspiration and innovation, and I call that, that's monetized creativity is innovation. So the creativity that ultimately inspired you, that led to over time your innovation in this business model, those same qualities, if harnessed, they can cut through steel. So we're talking laser. A couple 100 watts of laser, appropriately focused, you can cut through steel. 10,000 watts can be a floodlight at a football stadium where you feel very little heat and it manages to light up an oval. It's not cutting through.
Right,
steel.
same amount of energy, two outcomes.
Same energy.
Which brings to mind that other thesis, which is like water and steam are the same thing at different frequencies.
Yeah. Our job in coaching and consulting to innovative, purpose-driven, enormously ambitious entrepreneurs and business leaders is to support them in harnessing and channeling that energy such that it has the greatest impact. Because if that is left unchecked, and I'm not saying anyone voluntarily or consciously runs all over the field, but that same energy that got you to this place if it is not channeled, is going to lead you to find a whole bunch of other things that are really interesting and could be monetized. So the act of entrepreneurialism, it ultimately, if you really boil it down, that there is some level of creative insight that's led to the inspiration, the light bulb moment that there's something in this. I could turn this into something. The unpacking of that, the reworking of that, the repackaging of that, which I would call kind of the process of innovation, that results in a business model that you decide to test, that you have high level of conviction around, decide to test, and that you then take to the world and turn into a business. That creativity, inspiration, innovation flywheel is addictive. It feels awesome.
Such a dopamine rush.
It's so much fun, right?
Yeah.
Like creating a new business, creating something out of nothing feels great. And you talk to anyone who writes music or writes books or writes plays, or creatives have a wonderful life. So there is something innately human about creativity. And it's why I'm really interested, and we'll get into the AI thing later, but there's a layer at which we are not acting reductively, like the way we think of AI. We're acting we're on a different plane, and call it the flow state, call it divine inspiration, call it an outcome and meditative process, whatever you like.
Yeah, whether you believe in leprechauns or God,
whatever,
it comes from somewhere.
You're seeing around corners and over horizons, you're connecting dots that other people haven't, and there is a level of original thought. Even if you've drawn on a whole bunch of pre-existing ideas, the original thought is putting it together and repackaging it in your own unique way. And that process is highly addictive. So to then distill it into an offer with all the complexity and all the frustration of sort of front, middle, back office, distribution, supply partners, people management, at a certain point, a lot of entrepreneurs get bored and they want to go back to the fun bit.
like I did. And you're saying the compounding piece is often forgotten, and it's just like, let me create the new thing versus just doubling down.
Exactly.
And there's one thing just to touch on here. Darren Hardy has a book on this called The Compound Effect, and he has this concept where he goes, I'll give you a penny that doubles every day.
Yeah.
Or I'll give you $1 million.
Yeah.
Which one do you want?
Yeah.
And after 30 days, the double a day expires. But if you double a penny every day for 30 days, I think it ends up being about $14 million. What you're saying is the compounding is what someone needs to focus on versus just trying to get the cash grab.
Yeah.
That they think they're going to get from an exit.
Yeah, well, it could be a cash grab, and it could just be scratching that emotional itch that is around creativity and innovation. But for whatever reason, there's a level of distraction. And so what we really encourage entrepreneurs to do, and to really simplify it, to oversimplify it, is get famous for one thing. So before you're tempted to rush into something else, make sure that you are famous in the eyes of at least some subset of your target market before you get too tempted by adding a new product or service around it. Now, I would caution that. There's an exception to every rule. I would, caution that statement by saying that doesn't mean we're stubborn in the eyes of obvious evidence to the contrary. So if product market fit isn't there, if a new competitor comes in that dramatically underprices you, if supply chains break down due to a pandemic, like there's a bunch of reasons that you might have to rethink that original strategy. But one reason not to rethink it is it's kind of working, but I've got excited by something completely new, because the risk is that you're pulling up 96 meters down the 100-meter sprint to run back to the starting blocks and go again. Now, there's another qualifier, which I think will make the entrepreneurs in the audience feel a bit better. So they're not going to have to do the same thing for the rest of their lives, which is another metaphor I use, which I actually got from Matt Jensen, a long-term client, the founder CEO of MJ Bale. And he got it from a meditation teacher that I also went to see as well, the late, great Tim Browne. And he spoke about this cycle of life, which is a Buddhist concept, but I think it applies to everything, including business, personal relationships, nature, the natural world, which is growth, maintenance, destruction. And it's a continuous cycle. When you launch anything, relationship, new growth forest, a business, anything, there's a period of intense growth. And that is really exciting. And it gets to a point of maturity where it's largely about maintenance. There's overlap between. There's overlap between everything we're talking about today. There's a little bit of growth, but it's mainly about solidifying and enforcing a position. So you've created some space for the organism, whether it's a plant, a business, or a relationship. And it's more about showing up and being consistent, because that's the basis upon which we build long-term trust and confidence. And that optimizes lifetime value. Now I'm talking about business, not relationships. Don't worry, when I talk about my relationship like this. Now I'm talking about business. Maintenance is incredibly important because consistency is one of the key hallmarks of trust. And if we don't have trust, the legal definition of a partnership starts with a relationship based on mutual trust and confidence. So if you want a partnership with your community, you better be consistent and you better turn up and create that mutual trust and confidence. Now, eventually everyone gets bored, including the community, the entrepreneur, everyone else involved, and it's time to do something new. For the entrepreneur, the temptation is to dump that and move on to something new. You don't have to. The best businesses that I consult with and I coach have a growth team and they have a maintenance team.
Right.
So
they separate the two ideologies.
Yeah.
They're very different.
They are.
Because I think when you start a company, for example, when you're in startup phase or growth phase or bootstrap phase, it's exhilarating, it's intoxicating, it's exciting, everything's happening all at once, everything's growing. But at a certain point, you need to have an operating rhythm. Yeah. That's like orders come in, order gets fulfilled, that happens on time. And then how do we speed up the maintenance?
Yeah.
Potentially, which might be growth, but once it's optimized, it's just like, let's maintain this system so it doesn't break.
And the big difference is, in maintenance is not stasis. Maintenance is still about incremental improvement, but it's not transformational.
It's not radical.
Growth is transformational. Maintenance is incremental. So of course we're incrementally improving all the time, but it's not this transformational period.
No.
We're offering something completely new, new distribution channels, new products and services, new price strategy, new revenue model, whatever it looks like.
So you liken it more
there's
to maybe Kaizen from Toyota, where it's like 1% improvements every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a great approach to maintenance. So there's two things in this that I think are important for the entrepreneurial audience. One is, don't worry, you're not going to be stuck doing the same thing for the rest of your life. But until you are famous for something and you have the proof points to validate that, you're not quite done yet. Once you do have something to maintain, you're no longer figuring it out, because we don't want to maintain something that's still being figured out. It's kind of an oxymoron. It's impossible. Once you've got something that's well enough established and proven that it's ready to maintain, then it's about going back to growth. Now, to get back to growth, you've got to go through a destruction phase. That freaks everyone out a little bit.
It panics people. Whenever
Yeah.
I brought this up with interactions, I'm like, we might have to destroy some stuff in your business. People
Yeah.
will just start pumping the brakes.
Yeah. So it could be as simple as what I just described, that the organizational structure you have, the people you have, the systems you have are now maintenance oriented. So in order to go back into growth, we need to destroy the assumption that what we have is enough.
Right.
That the org chart is complete, that our fixed cost base can't get any bigger, that the EBITDA we've committed to our investors to maintaining with maintenance is sacrosanct. Because the reality is, if you want to go back into growth, you're going to need some different perspective. You're going to need some different people. You're probably going to need some different partners, et cetera, et cetera. So the destruction could be as mild, and it's still hard to do because you've got to rope in all the stakeholders and get them aligned. But it could be as notionally simple as destroying some assumptions around what the business looks like.
Which is what I've experienced in the last 10 months.
Yeah.
So like, just to touch on what you're talking about here, like I've gone through this journey together with you. And when you brought this up with me, like, hey, DAIN, like in your business, you've got things that need to grow, things that need to be maintained, and things that need to be destroyed.
Yeah.
I remember I was like, dude, pump the brakes. What are you talking about destruction for? But I think I had to destroy some assumptions. I had to destroy some limiting beliefs. I had to destroy potentially how I believed that the vision should come together.
Yes.
And it's kind of like if, you sit down with a coach and you say, coach, I want to win the championship. It's like, cool, let's have a real conversation about what that means. So, you didn't come in out of nowhere and start bullying me. I sat down with you and said, look, how do we actually legitimately scale this operation to north of 100 million?
Yeah.
And you were like, are you fucking serious? And I was like, yes. And you're like, well, okay, that's a very different conversation. So you were kind of, how would you say, giving yourself permission or a license to kill, if you will, through the commitment of like, this is my goal. I legitimately mean it. So then we had to engineer everything back to that to say, well, okay, like if we're legitimately trying to get there, we might have to destroy some ways by which we do things.
Yeah.
Which is a painful metamorphosis. But for me, I think it's so paramount as an entrepreneur to sit down and go, hey, everything I thought up until this point, Control-Alt-Delete.
Yeah. Well, some of it.
Some of it.
And it's about being really targeted. And so it could be, you touched on a bunch of mindset stuff there.
Yeah.
So the destruction of limiting self-beliefs, of, core assumptions, of an organizational chart that everyone aligned on when you took your last round of equity, they're all relatively, well, I wouldn't say they're simple because, in reality they're hard, but they're simple to understand. There's layers to the destruction piece.
Yeah, it's not everything all at once.
No, and sometimes it's as little as a mindset, and sometimes it's as much as a fundamental redesign of the organization that involves some painful decisions, that involves some restructuring, perhaps the jettisoning of relationships that you've had long term, partners that you've worked with that you believe in. Like, there can be some very difficult aspects to the destruction phase, but there isn't always. But ultimately, it's in, how I mentioned before, it's in service of what? When you have strategic clarity, then the way that you are approaching each of these, you've got a North Star in terms of, does this serve us? Is this getting us closer or further away from our strategic objectives, including an assessment of opportunity cost? So second and third order consequences are, no one really wants to get into those, and it can feel a bit esoteric, and we're playing three-dimensional chess.
What do you mean?
Second and third order. Okay, so the simplest is the opportunity cost. Like, everyone understands opportunity cost. If I do this, I can't do that. If I invest in this, I can't invest in that. So if we continue to do this, invest in this particular market, commit a certain amount of human resources are time, money, and people. So if I want to reallocate resources, I'm the leader of a business. My number one job after achieving strategic clarity and executive alignment is the efficient allocation of resources in service of the strategy. So what resources do I have to deploy? Time, money, and people. I can't get any more time unless I hire more people. It's the only way to leverage time is to have more people. None of us get more than 24 hours a day. And I can get more money through being a better operator or through taking on external money, in which case I want to be a great operator so I don't dilute too much. So the point is, what reallocation of time, money, and people within my current means, you may be able to raise more money, you may not, within the means I have available to me today across time, money, and people, what am I going to do differently to free up the necessary time, money, and people to do this? That's opportunity cost. I can't continue to do this because we have limited resources. And if I want to do that, I have to take it away from here. It's like pretty simple. So the opportunity cost assessment is, again, one that in high-functioning, extremely ambitious, fast-moving individuals, they don't always get to that. So it's like, this looks awesome. This opportunity's come out of nowhere. It's tactical, but my goodness, it seems exciting. Let's jump at it. And the whole team, the leader comes in and goes, guys, this has come up. I want everyone to drop what they're doing, and go and do this. And of course, it's like, great. The leader says, jump into that particular, pond of burning water, and we're there. Like we're going to go. It may or may not be a great decision, and absent an assessment of not just the opportunity in isolation, but the opportunity cost, both of which are grounded in strategic priorities, understanding what you're trying to do strategically, then it's kind of amateur hour. And we see a lot of businesses that operate highly tactically and opportunistic. That whole hustle culture thing, I get it. I love the emphasis on getting shit done and just moving fast and working harder and, let's just go and get a beta up and minimum viable product. I hate that term, by the way. Like I just cannot understand why your desire to launch a business and achieve your dreams is now being attached to a minimum viable product. I mean, really? It works in software. If you're beta testing it with a small subset of the target market, it doesn't work in anything else. So I think there's a lot that can go wrong when you're chasing the new shiny toy, and there's a lot can go right by building a business to the point where you've got something to maintain and continuing to incrementally grow it whilst diverting just enough resourcing and bringing in just enough different people, partners, processes, technology, whatever it is, to test new opportunities for growth. So we're not putting all our cards on one bet. We've got a business that is growing at 5%, 8%, 12%, 15%, whatever that looks like in your sector. So it's a good level of growth, but it's incremental. It's about improving what we already have in small ways. And then you're diverting just enough resources to test and learn around growth opportunities. That's a really smart balance. The wrong way to do it is to get this to a certain point where we get bored, divert all your best people into an entirely new, unproven project, start to underservice the customer that's paying the bills, and you start to see things head south. Now, there's a lot of nuance in that. And different sectors, the rules are different. And I'm not saying this is a rule for everyone, but as an operating premise or an intellectual framework within which to approach these decisions, it's not a bad one.
Business owners, if you're stuck using one platform for every project, you're probably stuck in a growth bottleneck. More clients means more hires, which just adds noise and cuts into profits. To break the loop, you need flexible tools that don't stretch your resources. Wix Studio is a smart addition to your business toolkit. Intuitive by design, your team can quickly master the platform and focus on the work that matters the most. Then keep up the momentum with a built-in management tool, a unified dashboard, reusable assets, and a Figma plugin that turns static design into launch-ready websites. With robust native business solutions like bookings, e-commerce, and events, you can take any project at any scale without the added cost of third-party plugins. Plus, Wix Studio is a low-maintenance platform, meaning you can redirect the client budget towards real growth initiatives. Think more value for clients, steady income streams, and stronger relationships. To get started, simply go to wix.com/studio. So you're saying that, let's imagine the entrepreneur is in a cockpit if you will, there's a couple things that they can use to guide themselves. One, which is, what's their capacity for themselves and their team, what's consistent across the boards, and the third one, which is capacity, consistency,
capability, capacity, and consistency.
And you're saying, okay, that's one Geiger of like how we can measure things. The other thing is what's in growth mode, what's in maintenance mode, what's in destruction mode.
Yeah.
One thing I think of when I see that, and I saw this recently where Elon Musk was talking about what he's doing with SpaceX. He said, if you're not putting 10% of your system back in, you're not deleting enough of it.
Yeah.
So do you often feel that entrepreneurs aren't removing enough from what it is that they're trying to do? They have too much potentially. What do you think is like the common mistakes when it comes to growth, maintenance, and destruction that you've seen with entrepreneurs?
Well, I think just not doing exactly what you just said. So what Elon was referring, I mean, Elon is he's a completely different breed.
Yeah.
And he has a different approach that is not going to work for everyone.
That's true.
But there's a lot we can learn from him. I think he is ruthless about it. He embraces the destructive phase. So he is utterly ruthless in his understanding of the importance of destroying in order to recreate, to get back into growth. And you see it even across his portfolio. He's got some that are largely now in maintenance mode. You've got some that are largely in growth mode, and you've got some that appear to be well and truly in destruction mode. And and he basically, we all know the way he operates. He goes very, very deep with any one business at any one time. He focuses on the most important problem. He sleeps on the factory floor to get it solved. I mean, he's phenomenal. I mean, agree with his politics or don't agree with his politics, I don't really care. As an entrepreneur, I don't think we've seen anyone like him in generations. So I think there's a lot to learn there. Equally, not everyone can do that.
No.
A lot of people would prefer a more balanced existence. A lot of people have families they want to see occasionally. A lot of people want to invest in their personal health and wellness. So whilst we won't necessarily mimic and mirror, there's a lot we can learn. And I think you're asking the question, what do people get wrong? I think we need to embrace a little bit more of his appetite for ruthlessly destroying that which is not adding value, because we're not in business. Is it a hobby or a business?
Right.
So
how would you describe the difference?
Well, I mean, a hobby is something you would do for the hell of it. It's something you would do for fun. And there's a lot of, again, Venn diagrams, hate to keep going back to it. There's some overlap, right? So there are hobbies that are pure hobbies. Not only are you not getting paid for it, no one would pay you for it. I would say my playing the guitar is a good example of that.
We've talked about this.
People would pay me to stop playing the guitar, but I insist. Then there's people that turn hobbies into a business. There's a lot of those where ultimately they're not scalable. To the extent they are scalable, they're not that interested in going that hard at it, but they love the fact that they are able to pursue something they love and take care of their family. There's lots of businesses like that. Then we have businesses that are what we more typically understand as corporate entities that act in service of their shareholders. And their fiduciary duty to those shareholders is to maximize profit. Now, if you take that duty seriously, and you need to be clear-eyed on all elements of that process, with the flip side of that coin being the strategic clarity, executive alignment, and tactical autonomy. And with tactical autonomy, tactical agility are sort of two sides of the same coin down there, but we'll get into that later, or maybe not at all. We'll see. But the idea that you can, it's not a buffet. You can't kind of select the bits you like and not do the bits you don't. So I love growth. Maintenance is a bit boring, and I'm too nice a guy to go through destruction. So I'm going to have, the steak with ice cream, and I'm going to, you know what I mean? Like, you don't go down the line and pick out the pieces that you think appeal to you the most. There are frameworks that work for businesses, and there are frameworks that work exceptionally well for businesses, regardless of sector, product or service, B2C or B2B, physical or digital. And if you choose to ignore those, great, but it is at your peril. And you might just hustle your way through it, but you probably won't.
Well, we've had this conversation many times where I've probably been in the camp of like, yeah, growth mode. Maintenance is something that I'm like, okay, we should probably solve for that. And then destruction, I'm like, yeah, do we have to? And I think I've learned over the last 10 months, how important the destruction piece is, because it's like, well, it doesn't mean the end of something. It just means it could mean a metamorphosis, a transformation, a change, a pivot, an adjustment.
Yeah.
But sometimes it is a divorce from something.
Yes.
And that can be painful.
It can.
But rightfully so, back to what you said about the Elon piece is like, if there's a page we could take out of his book, it is some of this ruthless commercial bone in his acumen that is sleeping on the factory floor, that is keeping people acutely accountable and demanding excellence.
Yeah.
So let's just say, like you said, divorce ourselves from the politics. If we just purely go, okay, as a case study of an entrepreneur, he's had stacks of evidence that he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
When it comes to making money.
Yeah.
Yeah. What would you say that your advice would be if someone could, I guess, distill that into themselves around this? Like, how do you gauge that you're investing the right amount of growth, the right amount of maintenance, the right amount of destruction? Obviously, it's different in every business, but is there a rule of thumb that you try to stick to?
Unfortunately not. So I think it's highly individual, and also it's such a dynamic marketplace.
Yeah.
And these do overlap. So it's more about becoming aware. You need to be conscious of the different. So you've got critical, and I don't know how deep to go in this rabbit hole, so I'll try to keep it high level. There's critical success factors in every business. And when we look at a business in a silo, we want to optimize for success, or another way, like de-risk them as much as possible. So we understand strategically what we're trying to achieve. We have an executive team that are highly competent. They've got capacity. They're consistent, et cetera, et cetera. And we've empowered the executive and functional leads with tactical autonomy to get stuff done, which allows the leadership to focus on running the team.
Right. So you have like
the business.
a direction we're marching in. The executive alignment is like we're all marching in the same direction, co-authoring the milestones that we need to march in to get the job done. And then the actions are in spirit or in direction of what we're going toward. And you're saying that a lot of companies aren't really doing that.
Well, no, because it's also, it's not one and done. It's just a constant process. I mean, strategy is not constant. If you're changing a strategy every week, it's not really a strategy, it's a tactic. But in terms of executive alignment, that's constant. I mean, if you're kind of, again, another way to describe the CEO's responsibilities, I described allocation of resources, most efficient or optimized allocation of resources. Another way to say the same or similar thing is that you are leading, coaching, and holding accountable the leadership team. The leadership's team is then to run their functional responsibilities with a level of autonomy such that you get the intellectual firepower and the worldly experience and all the network and et cetera, et cetera. You get those full benefits at each functional level. It's not the CEO making all the decisions for everyone.
Right.
A, that's massively disempowering, and no one who's got any respect for themselves would last in a company like that for very long. And secondly, you're discounting the fact that, 3 or 4 or 5 brains at the functional level might possibly conceivably have thought of things that you haven't as one brain at the top of the organization. The team sport analogy, the military analogy, the orchestra analogy, it's the collective is much more, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Right. So like if an entrepreneur is in their business and they've very much been the Michael Jordan of their team for a long time, potentially their ego might get in the way of their company growing. And you've said this to me multiple times where, a company can only grow as fast as its founder does.
Well, no company outgrows its leader.
Yeah.
Is how I put it. And that is, to my knowledge, 100% true. I've never found an exception. Now, the really evolved, actualized leader recognizes their strengths and leans into them, and also recognizes their weaknesses. And they solve for not only their personal weaknesses temperamentally or intellectually or in terms of their knowledge base, but also in terms of the deep domain expertise that's required at each functional level to be truly great. So a really strong leader is they're standing on the shoulders of giants, and those giants are not just everyone they've learnt from externally and everything they've experienced in the past, it's their team. And the leader that recognizes that their success is dependent on their ability to lead that team in an optimal way. And then the organization's success is ultimately dependent as much on them as each functional lead's ability to manage their people and optimize for the success of their functional milestones and KPIs. It's a collective, it is truly a team effort. And we don't see a lot of that or hear a lot of that from a lot of entrepreneurs when they're on podcasts talking about everything they've achieved.
You hear all about the hustle culture and taking ice baths in the morning and all the mantras and everything else, which is fantastic. But you're saying that you really need to take a deep look in the hood of your business and think about, are your team in alignment? Are we marching in the right strategic direction? Are we taking the actions in said direction? And a lot of people like to say, well, yeah, sure I am. But when you get under the hood, you're like, man, like this engine isn't built to go 100 miles an hour.
Well, yeah, and we got to this through your question around, that balance. Are there phases to growth, maintenance, and destruction? And so this is a great segue at this point, because I said not really. There's no set rules. And where I was getting to was, even when you look at the critical success factors in a silo, like what would this organization look like optimally across strategy, executive level, tactical, people, partners, et cetera, et cetera. We don't operate in a vacuum. We operate in an incredibly fluid, super competitive, ruthlessly aggressive marketplace. So not only is it not one and done, it's not up to us. So we will, what is it? Was Sun Tzu said that no strategy survives first encounter with the enemy. It is directionally important.
The art of war. Yeah.
It's directionally important, and it holds us to an aligned direction, and it provides us with milestones on KPIs on which we hold each other accountable. So I'm not discounting it at all.
No, but one of my favorite quotes that you said in a meeting recently, which is, we had a graph, and you said there's 100% a guarantee about every graph that's ever been pitched about what a P&L could be. It's 100% wrong.
Yeah.
So back to the Sun Tzu quote is like, you can have the best plan for battle.
Yeah.
Going to battle, plans change.
They have to. And so tactically, you're very agile and you're very fluid. The strategy shouldn't shift too much, but there are instances where you have to rethink strategy because of an externality. And we can all think of examples over the last few years, whether it's pandemic or supply chain disruptions or whatever. So there are examples where strategy needs to be reviewed much sooner than you were planning on reviewing it. But largely it's around a tactical agility. I'm just going to get back to your question about the growth, maintenance, destruction. If you have that operating framework that marries that strategic clarity, executive alignment, and tactical autonomy and agility, then the chances are that you won't be relying on yourself. The chances are that others in your team are going to see an opportunity to spin off something from the maintenance business to get back into growth. So we need to look at this business unit. It's minimally profitable at best. It's sucking up way too much resourcing, time, money, and people. If we exited that, we might be able to spin up this through a licensing deal in a new territory, whatever it is, right? And those suggestions are bubbling up constantly to the CEO because you're empowering the people with your functional leads, and they're empowering their teams with the respective tactical autonomy and agility. They're closer to the coalface. They will find opportunities typically that are ahead of you or are different to those which you might perceive. And so you create a structure within the organization that once you're in maintenance mode, you're actively seeking new growth opportunities. So you're not getting attracted by the new shiny toy before you've proven out the business. But once you've proven out the business, you've got a certain level of traction. It's washing its own face. However you decide to measure it through KPIs, financial and operational, it's at a point now where, geez, we'd be thrilled with 10 to 20% growth per annum in this. Like, it's a really good offer. We see room for incremental improvement. You're a retailer. We've got 5 locations. We've identified 80 locations around Australia. Now, 5 to 80, you would say that's transformational growth. But fundamentally, you're taking the same brand, the same assortment, and the same customer experience and just adding stores. I would say that's incremental. It's a large number, but it's incremental in the sense that nothing fundamentally is being transformed in order to provide that growth.
Right, you have a blueprint, if you will, and it's copy-paste, copy-paste.
So it could be 5 or 10%, it could be 300%, and it's still incremental if it's fundamentally the same offer. Transformational growth is we've got a retail offer in menswear, and we've decided that we want to go into shoes or eyewear or home furnishings or whatever. That's going to take a few people from the maintenance team, probably add in a few people from somewhere else, maybe raise a bit of dough to set up a separate entity if we're not prepared to fund it, or maybe take a little bit of the free cash flow from maintenance and fund it. And we're going to set up, what Lockheed Martin used to call a skunk works. So we'll set up 3 guys, 3 girls in a garage, 3 of each, whatever it is. And they are going to go hard on reimagining what this brand offer could look like. How could this brand offer manifest to the benefit of our customers in a different geography, in a different segment, in a different product or service suite? That is how we maintain and we grow at the same time. Now, you could ask, what's the destruction in that? Well, resources had to be freed up. So at least some assumptions had to be destroyed. That unit may be less profitable because it's funding the new unit. That unit may give up some of its people so they can work in the new unit. If the board of directors and shareholders that own the existing business do not believe in the new business, it may need to be a subsidiary. We may need to set up and fund a new entity, go into a joint venture. So something has to be destroyed. It could be an operating assumption. It could be the capital stack. It could be partners, whatever it is, in order to get back into growth. So to answer your question, no, there is no set measure or time frame. And the only way you really will know is if you have optimized for maintenance. You've got a team that are responsible for continuously improving what is a pretty consistent brand, product, and service offer. And you have some way of harnessing the best ideas in the business, including potential some external advisors who are scanning the horizon for acquisitions or M&A activity, new markets, whatever. So at the CEO level, at the C-suite level, it should be a combination of let's percolate the best ideas in the business and continuously review those ideas for opportunities for growth. It's 5% of my week, 10% of my week, whatever it is, as well as external advisors, where they're bankers, corporate advisory, guys like us that are scanning the horizon and looking for opportunities for the brand to grow externally. And I think that's a great balance. And the businesses that I've seen do that well I'm thinking of a couple in particular, like Urban Outfitters has a very structured process to this. And they are very, very good at what they do. They only invest in a new brand if they believe it's a better investment than continuing to incrementally improve their existing offer. And they're ruthless in terms of the metrics they apply to that. There are brands coming to Urban Outfitters all the time trying to get acquired. And they very rarely do a deal. But when they do a deal, it's like Free People. Free People started as a brand within Anthropologie. It was a small, tiny little capsule offer. Meg Hayne launched it as creative director. She convinced the board to spin it out. It's $1 billion brand now. In many ways, Free People, I think it still is the fastest growing part of the Urban Outfitters group. Now, in that period of time, there were dozens and dozens of acquisition opportunities that came to Urban, including a couple that I put to them in my time there, brands that I loved. And it just didn't pass their test. So very disciplined, very consistent. They got criteria for an acquisition. It either meets the criteria or it doesn't. And one of the last ones is, will we get a better return on shareholders' capital? Are we confident? Do we have a high level of conviction that we will get a better return on shareholders' capital by investing in the new brand, but then continuing to invest our own? Now, that level of discipline, Urban's been around since I think it was the 70s. I mean, it's a phenomenal success story. Dick Hayne, the founder, the Haynes are the wealthiest family in not just Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania. And it's just been consistent. Now you could say, well, it's such a success story and it's been around for so long, at least in my world, in the world of retailing and fashion, that it doesn't get a lot of attention. They're not popping up in hustle culture podcasts. They just keep doing what they do really, really well.
Yeah.
And over time, that family has accumulated enormous wealth. They've created enormous wealth for their shareholders. There are hundreds of millionaires that are being created within the Urban Outfitters ecosystem through stock options and equity, and they pay tens of thousands of mortgages. So, they're one of the largest employers in Philadelphia. So I think there is the flashy kind of look at me way to go about this, and I'm not denigrating that at all. But there is also just the consistent application, the steel backbone resilience, and the ruthless kind of objectivity around, are we ready to go from maintenance to growth? And if we are, what does it look like? How do we resource it? Let's go. And that's how great sporting teams operate. That's how great businesses operate. That's how great militaries operate. So, yeah, the idea that it's all sort of flash in the pan, tactical idea, new influencer, digital thing, let's go, absent a strategic framework, absent the executive level and the resourcing required to do it not just once and have a flash in the pan and be one of those dozens of Instagram brands we see rise and fall within 2 or 3 years, it's you got to play the long game.
If we're moving up to the marketing piece, the P&L piece, one thing that you were touching on recently was what we or you've termed as the 4 epochs of branding. And the reason I'm attaching it to marketing, not branding, is like it's the delivery of which and how that's framed. Can you unpack what you mean by that, and what is the era that has been in the past, and what era are we in now?
Okay, so this is me playing armchair academic. So forgive me.
I think it checks out. Yeah,
but I love the interplay of consumer psychology, marketing, advertising as it's evolved over time. You know, brand theory, the hero now. Like I'm fascinated by it, so I'm a bit nerdy, and I read a lot. So forgive me if this sounds a bit esoteric, but I think as a simplified framework, the simple version, it's a useful way to think about how you're showing up in market and whether you are really whether you're fully exploiting the opportunity of what you created with brand, and indeed whether you even have the brand that you think you have. So, okay, so we'll run through them quickly. So I think there's kind of 4 distinct eras, if you like, of brand and marketing. The first one was, and it lasted about 60, 70 years, is what we might call kind of the monologue era, where essentially a brand was communicating in a unidirectional manner to the customer what that brand promise was. And then we can delve into the detail about how brand promise has changed over time. I mean, originally it was this: our product will not kill you. You know, this food is not contaminated. This tractor or carriage, and then car or tractor will not blow up and set you on fire. Like there was sort of pretty basic trust issues.
a lot of death in the world back then.
A lot of death, a lot of death, a lot of maiming, a lot of missing arms.
Great way to sell.
So,
it's just, you're not going to die.
Yeah, you won't die. And then obviously that evolved over time. So your better life was you will continue living. Your better life progressively became more aspirational, but it was largely a monologue. So I define what the brand promise is. I decide how it is going to show up. I'm not terribly interested, and in fact, you don't even have a means for communicating back to me, other than writing a letter to the editor of the newspaper, the local newspaper, or writing an letter to the CEO, which will promptly be thrown in the bin. There was no kind of two-way loop.
Right. So we're talking about like 1920s. We don't necessarily have phones or computers or anything like that.
Even earlier, like the century before. I mean, brands really started, if we go right, and without getting too nerdy about it, brands did start around safety, around public safety. And so anything that could kill you quickly tended to evolve into a branded offer. So guns, where bullets would typically often explode in the barrel and blow off a hand. Carriages that would fall off the horse and send you careening into a tree. Any kind of food or alcohol or so-called medicine that would send you blind or cripple you or whatever. So there were a bunch of categories that really required the reassurance of this stamp means that it's quality assured to some degree.
It's a guarantee. We'll tell you how it is.
Yeah. Not always a stock guarantee, unfortunately, but it was a safe bet. It was a safer bet. So it evolved over time in terms of what the promise was, and it moved more from more physical attributes resulting in physical safety to more emotional, mental, spiritual attributes and mental, emotional, spiritual actualization. I'll be a smarter version of myself. I'll be a more powerful version. So it evolved over time, but it was still largely a monologue. So whatever it was a one-way conversation. Think of it as a soliloquy. It's a monologue from brand to audience. We then started to move into the dialogue phase. Now, the dialogue phase really started off, way back when, call it, 70s, 80s.
Like Mad Men era.
It was, yeah, and it was pretty Mad Men, yeah, just after Mad Men, right? The early Mad Men era was still pretty monologue. But when we started to see, the better brands started realizing that customer insights were important. There was customer satisfaction surveys. There were 1-800 in the US line set up to take customer feedback. So that started pretty early. Arguably, it didn't really kind of gain momentum until the customer was engaged in a dialogue that was public. So that's really kind of early internet era with kind of message boards. You're too young, but I remember this time. That then evolved ultimately into social media. And the ability for customers to not just talk back, but to tell everyone else. Mm. But it was still largely about the brand and the way that the brand chose to turn up. So brand, marketing, product or service directed by the brand. The customer then saying, I liked it, I didn't like it, I want to see a bit more of this, I want to see a bit of that. That overlaps though, that social media era and the kind of the evolution of social media, particularly with Instagram and TikTok. I mean, we didn't really see much of it with Facebook. It was still mainly a conversation about the brand. I mean, it was a conversation, which is great, but it was still mainly about the brand on the brand's own terms.
Right. So we moved from monologue, which is I'm going to talk at you, to dialogue. Let's interact.
We will talk. But we'll talk on my terms.
Oh, I see.
So this is the product, this is marketing, this is how we do it in retail, this is what it's going to look like. We decide what the ads are. You like it, you don't like it, give us your feedback. We'll have a chat. You know, we're interested, kind of. Not that. You know. Towards the sort of last stage of dialogue was when we started to see the internet evolve into not just a two-way communication device that happened to have a public element, which is sort of the tail end of dialogue, but more into a forum in which I now get to interpret the brand. So there's been discussion for decades that the customer is a stakeholder in the brand, and all brands paid lip service to some degree or another around that. But they also had things called brand Bibles, which would indicate that it wasn't really subject to review. It was the gospel. The brand was deciding what the brand was. This is how it would show up. This is how it would look and feel in terms of logo and font and assets and models and art direction and channels and all the rest of it. So whilst we're saying you're a stakeholder on my terms. You're a stakeholder if you want to join my religion. And the Bible is how we govern our interaction.
So more dogmatic.
Very dogmatic, the definition of dogmatic. And sort of the tail end of that early internet era, pre-social media, but you're starting to see message boards. You're starting to see the sort of stuff that we would now describe as Reddit, but it was Reddit light. So it wasn't the full UGC world that we now exist in, but there was a level of dialogue, not just back to the brand, but public. And then the public were weighing in. And typically, this was pretty mind-blowing when we first started seeing this. Before we would get to that forum, our customers were defending us. So when I was CEO of a couple of brands, Sass & Bide in particular, when we started to see this occurring, and something had happened. You know, the one delivery of jeans, they were over sandblasted, and as a result, they were tearing. And these girls were hitting the dance floor on a Saturday night and getting a big tear through the crotch of their jeans, which was not great. And so we were getting a lot of complaints. What was interesting though is we started seeing on these internet forums, this is pre-social media, we started seeing on these internet forums that our customers were defending us. No, this is Sass & Bide, and they make locally in Australia, and not everything goes perfectly right every time, but they're real artisans, they hand make it, and that's why every pair is not exactly the same. And we were just watching it. My marketing director, Nellie Fielding, and I were watching it going, this is extraordinary. So it had moved from a dialogue to just the early start of a co-creator. Now, at that point, they were just participating in a conversation of the brand. Then social media got its legs, and we started to really get into the third epoch, which is what I would call co-creator. Lots of different people use lots of different terms. I like co-creator because it's beyond stakeholder. Now what we're saying is that the customer is actually creating brand. So whilst we are putting down the funnel, our vision of what we think brand should look like. So these are the models we used, and this is the campaign, and this is the TBC for the insurance ad with everyone having a good time, whatever it is, that's our vision of what the brand is. If you have a real brand and you have an engaged community, then that community is now creating their own content. And TikTok supercharged this. Obviously, it started with a little bit on Facebook, you know, Instagram's sort of kind of, but TikTok's really what's taken this to a whole new level. Of course, now TikTok's playing back into Reels and everything else. So you've now got this incredibly vibrant UGC community. And user-generated content, when it first kicked off, it was thought of as the customer just promoting the brand for you. That ultimately they were kind of unpaid influencers or ambassadors for the brand. What we started seeing over the last, 10 years really, but particularly over the last few years, and this was supercharged by COVID, is the customer is actually presenting back to you a vision of the brand that you may not have even thought of. So they're wearing it in a different way. They're using it in use cases that you never thought of. They're describing it to their friends with attributes that you didn't even realize it had. And that's feeding back into the brand team that is then not just boosting and promoting that UGC content, but incorporating it in their own. So the thinking within the brand about what the brand stands for, how the customer optimally utilizes the offer, and how the two sort of link together in narratives. You've got a whole bunch of content creators that are they're film directors, they're actors, they're ambassadors, they're influencers, they're models, they're thought leaders, and they're giving it all back to the brand for free. And the best brands are looking at it and going, my goodness, we didn't think of that. That's really clever. And rather than just boosting it and having a little viral moment, very tactical, it's actually going all the way to the top. It's going to CMO and CEO level where they're looking at it and rethinking the potential of the brand, which is opening up opportunities with the existing customer base, but also often identifying a customer cohort that they weren't targeting in ways that they didn't even realize were relevant. So that co-creator is super interesting. And I think it turns that term stakeholder from window dressing, something pretty superficial, into something much more substantive.
But now you're seeing we're in an era where there's co-ownership. People want to have a slice. They want to get paid for it.
Well, there's been a bunch of research and thinking around this over the last decade around potential for micropayments that was cash
or affiliates
using fiat currency. There's a lot of talk in the crypto world that there is the potential to there's a potential to expedite that for a bunch of reasons around freedom from certain regulatory regimes, but also that cryptocurrency is by its very nature universal currency. You're not going through multiple conversions. If I'm interacting with a French brand and they are paying me in euros, I was going to say French francs. That's how old I am. They're paying me in euros on some micro, half a euro cent or whatever. Great. But, there is then a level of conversion I need to go through. I lose money at every stage. It's not a fungible, I can't just trade it with everyone all over the world. Some people want euros, some people don't. I've got to find a buyer, I've got to sell it, et cetera, et cetera. So through a combination of crypto, blockchain technologies, and some of these Web.3, these emerging business models around what they're calling 3.0, Web 3.0, there is the potential for a new model that recognizes and rewards what you do for my brand in a way that creates a tradable asset. So it's not a loyalty program. You get 10% off next time, DAIN. It's like, great, like better than nothing. But I'm out here hauling ass for you guys. I am giving you the best of my creative ability. I am so in love with your brand. I'm effectively creating what the equivalent was TVCs back in the day, and amazing print campaigns and beautiful PR moments that we as a brand owner would have spent millions of dollars on, not knowing if they're going to work or not. So in this world, you at your own risk, the world's full of entrepreneurs, creative entrepreneurs now. They're on TikTok. So they're creating content. And some of it is really compelling. And they're just at this point not being rewarded with anything other than likes. So what I'm saying is the attention economy, to truly be an economy and not just a attention metric, how many likes did I get, with all the enrichment attached to that going to the tech platforms, I think it makes sense for us to think about a more equitable approach where those creating the value on the platform to the benefit of both the platform and whatever brand they're interacting with has a means within which the platform, and we haven't spoken about the platform could also participate in this, but the brand and or the platform can recognize and reward those creators in a way that gives them an asset. Now, at the moment, influencers with a significant following have this opportunity. They already do, right? So brands pay influencers, platforms pay influential content creators to be exclusive to their platform. So whether you're Taylor Swift or Joe Rogan, you're in a different league in terms of what the platforms offer you. I'm talking about this, if the average teenager in America spends between 17 and 22 hours a week on TikTok, and they are creating content constantly, and they have at the moment no means to monetize that unless they've got 500,000 followers or more. I think this is an interesting new way to think about the relationship between brand and consumer. We talk about community, right? So typically a community, a real community, like if we go right back to our days in tribal clans, the community was about, there was a constant exchange of value. So to be a member of the community and a welcome member of the community, to benefit from the protection of the warriors, and to benefit from the nourishment of the hunters and gatherers, and to benefit from the physical protection of those that made the shelters, like the list goes on, right? You were expected to add value. And there was constant exchange. And that's the basis of the word community. That's what we understand as community in its most fundamental sense. When we talk about community as brand owners, mostly it's bullshit. Mostly we're saying these are the people who buy from us. It's not a community. There's no mutual exchange of value. There's no recognition of what you bring to the party other than a like. So what I'm suggesting is the technology is now available and the business models are now emerging to rethink what the relationship between brand and consumer could look like. And that's brand on the product and service side, but it's also on the tech platform side. No brand or tech platform is necessarily going to rush into this, although some are experimenting with it. The tech platforms, I think, are, there's been demands for tech platforms to share the monetary rewards with the community that propelled their value for a very long time, and it doesn't appear to be happening. So I think it's more likely to start on the brand side. And if we want to go a level deeper, in a world within which instant price comparison on any product or service is available with a click or two on my phone, the importance of the brand to represent something above and beyond the cost of production. So the inputs that went into that product or the time and motion that went into that service, the importance of a brand through its brand layer, marketing layer, the whole CX, the whole customer experience, to demonstrate value above and beyond those physical inputs, it's never been more important. And one aspect of that, I think, is rethinking how we can build, nourish, and reward community. There's others, of course, but I suspect, and my crystal ball, which isn't always perfectly clear, I suspect that a follow-on from the co-creator is going to be at least some level co-ownership.
When you're in the cockpit of running your enterprise, you got to be very conscious about like the zeitgeist of culture, trends, where things are going, how people like to be marketed to, the type of relationships they want to have back with said brands. And we're in a different era where people want ownership.
Yeah.
And that hasn't come to fruition yet, but the people that try to get on the bleeding edge of that are going to have the advantage.
Yeah, 100%. It also ties in with my sort of obsession with AI. And something I saw on X, which I sent to you actually, was a quote from one of the guys I follow on X. And it was just, in the AI economy, execution is cheap and ideas are priceless.
Ooh.
And I think an awful lot of what brands have become terribly good at is execution.
Right.
And what originally started as a set of ideas that evolved into a philosophy or a way of seeing the world, that evolved into a promise, all about ideas, all about creativity, all about literally the inspiration and innovation to create something out of nothing and make it so engaging and compelling that I can drag a whole host of people along on that journey with me. So very IP focused, right? AI is not good at that. I mean, it may be one day, but right now it is a reductive algorithm that that understands and distills and articulates, summarizes convention better than you or I could in 100 lifetimes. So if you want to know what best in class looks like on everything that's ever happened before, AI can serve it up in seconds. And with a little more effort and a few people around you, you can create your own model that sits on AI so that you can tailor it to your tone of voice, you can tailor it to your philosophy of business, you can like whatever you want, right? So we're very much in an era where AI can solve for an awful lot of execution to the 70, 80, in some cases 90% level. What it's not very good at is original ideas. Like if you jump on there and in whatever business you're in, I'd encourage you to ask AI for a original idea around some problem or challenge that you're grappling with, consumer, brand, marketing, operational, whatever. What you'll be served up, particularly when you ask the follow-up question in the prompt around what were your source material, it's source material. It's drawing it from things that have already been done. They've already been said, they've already been executed. Someone has already done this in the real world. Incredibly useful for operational efficiency. How best to structure a P&L for high growth e-commerce business focused on whatever. What is the optimal supply chain to blah, blah, blah. What is the perfect contract to solve as an NDA that will work in the United States, even though I'm based in Australia? All that stuff, really good.
So you're saying as AI is expanding in the market as we speak, it's gobbling up everything that is execution has been done before, repeated. And the slice above that you're saying where the opportunity lies is in invention.
Yes.
And as companies are facing, their faces in the furnace or the fire, so to speak, with how much the market's about to change. You're saying that ideas at this point in time that are original, that are one of one, that aren't prompted through an AI system are a strategic advantage for businesses.
Yeah, what I'm saying is invest more in ideas. So whether that is how you manifest the brand across products and services, how you reach your customers, how you recognize and reward your best customers, how you think about evolving the offer, the IP that sits at the top of the asset table in any organization, to go back to what we were talking about earlier with brand. Unfortunately, I mean, look at the stats. Australia massively underinvests in innovation. We're ranked like 157th in the world or something for the complexity of our economy. We're really good at a few things. We are not known as an innovation powerhouse. Israel, with a fraction of our population, produces multiple orders of magnitude more patents. Our investment in technology, biomedicine, genetics, deep tech generally, we are just so far off the mark. So if that is true of us as a culture, as a society, that we've got a bit fat and lazy, we've had rivers of gold coming off mining, extractive industries for a long time. Of course, there's exceptions. Canva's awesome. Atlassian's awesome. I'm not saying there's not exceptions, but as a rule, the development, exploitation, licensing, sale of IP is not what we're best at. And I'm saying that, and I know you've got a global audience, I'm speaking specifically to Australia at this point. We need to invest more in innovation. Where does innovation come from? It comes from creativity, a thesis, like I've got this idea, I need to test it, the whole scientific process of testing it out that leads to innovation, that ultimately leads to more value that you can invest back in. So we talked about the flywheel before, about brand marketing, sales, going back into brand. Same thing with the innovation flywheel. So anyway, we talk about flywheels all day long. What we spoke about before in terms of the Web 3.0, tokenization, membership as ownership, all that kind of stuff, it's out there. It's been out there for years. Matt Jensen was talking about this like 5 or 6 years ago. Passionate crypto advocate, has done extremely well, has ridden that market up and down for years. Very clear, very bright, very clued in, very well read. So he's been talking about this for years. I guess I've now sort of taken it and applied a slightly different lens on it because I work across clients in different sectors. But there's people like Matt talking about this all over the place. It's just people aren't paying enough attention. And to the extent they're interested intellectually, they're like, oh yeah, that sounds cool. I'll wait for someone else.
Right.
I'm going to be a fast follower because the guy or the girl that goes first burns a lot of dough, burns a lot of time, burns through a lot of people. And by the time it's been figured out, then I'll jump on board. I think the risk with that today is that things are moving much, much faster. And so if you are not, first of all, the narrative, the environment, the experience that you want to have with your customers, in many instances is getting a bit stale. And think of Shane. Think of the Shane business model. So on Shane, in real time, based on your browsing, before you've made a single purchase, they are changing the experience on the website. Well, you go, well, okay, cool, there's other brands that have done that. That's pretty cool. I'm seeing stuff that they think I would be more interested in. You're seeing a different experience on that website to me. Kind of cool. Amazon does it as well. Not that innovative. That then feeds into their demand forecasting and is fed into their supply chain. So they are changing their demand forecast, what they think will sell, and ordering product based on the activity of tens of millions of people on the website, whether they purchase or not. Now, in a world that is just starting to realize the capability of AI and apply it the way Shane has, which really no one else has at this point, they're really ahead of everyone. What does that do to your brand? So if I can get from Shane the physical attributes and at a price point, it's 90% as good as your product for 10% of the price. Lots of people will do that trade. There needs to be another reason. It can't just be price and convenience. So what is that other reason? Now, the brand narrative about creating aspiration, the promise of a better life, critically important. And that has to continue to evolve and it's got to be honored. And one of the ways we might honor that promise is by rewarding our community. So you can see how this all links together. These are not ideas in isolation.
No.
What I'm saying is you create the promise, you have to honor the promise. And how you honor that promise has to continuously evolve or people get bored. And this, I think this co-creator, which a lot of brands aren't in at that point yet, I think that's a great opportunity. If you're not into it, dive in. Like there's a ton of opportunity there.
Arguably maybe 5 of the market is actually actively doing that.
Definitely, yeah, because they're not, even those that are in it aren't really,
they're not really doing
fully
it properly.
realizing
They're
the
like, oh, I
potential of it.
paid an influencer agency and then they found it. But like I'm talking about true co-authorship is pretty rare. And you're saying that not only is that pretty rare and people are trying to catch up onto that, there's this next era that's kind of simultaneously taking place.
Fast. It's evolving fast.
Yeah.
And I think even if you dismiss everything I say around co-ownership and go, it just doesn't make sense. It's too woo-woo. It's too hard. You know, blah, 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 blah. I guess the main point that I'm making, whether you want to think about that as a potential application of this approach, or you've got another way that you would like to think about as a potential application of the approach is the same. And that is if you are not evolving the way that the customer interacts with your brand to constantly reinforce brand promise and create that intangible value that's got nothing to do with the physical attributes, the time and motion that went into your product, then Shane's going to kill you. And there'll be something like Shane in every category soon enough, whether it's furniture, whether it's eyewear, whether it's watches. What they're doing to apparel can be done in any physical category. And I can't really see why it couldn't be done for law firm services or for accounting services or for wealth management or for, i.e., I can get up to 70, 80, 90% of best in class at 10% of the price. Now, will I do that in every category in my life? No, probably not in building my house, for example. You know, I don't want it to fall in on me. And maybe there's certain categories I prioritize. I want a real Swiss watch. I don't want to, whatever. But there's an awful lot of things in my life that, honestly, I don't think the brands that are charging me 5, 10, 15 times as much are worthy of my custom. They're not creating the emotional connection. They're not evolving the experience in a way that I feel is rewarding. And as a result, the intangible value I place on that brand is steadily going down over time. Whilst the tangible value, there's 50 people that can compete with that. So when I get to the point where there is no intangible value or there's not much left, price comparison is not hard. And if I can get something that's 80, 90, 70, 80, 90% is good for 10% of the price, that's a pretty compelling deal.
Damn, dude, this is a lot to unpack, and you know, you and I can talk all day.
I know we can talk.
We can talk all day,
under wet
and
cement.
we try not to. But
we do sometimes.
we do sometimes.
Do you know, that's the biggest problem to everything I tell you about productivity is we start talking and it's a productivity killer.
But we have these ultimate jam sessions, and I'm glad to have made one of these public. And as you guys can see, what you're incredibly talented at is dissecting, unpacking, distilling information and looking at trends and forecasting what can happen next. And you do this at lightning speed with our clients, with your clients. And it's an honor to sit with you here and just unpack some of this.
Thank you.
And we would definitely like to get you back to do this again, because I think there's days and days worth of stuff we can unpack here. And I think AI is another big one, which we might jump back in on next week. And if you're listening to this and you'd like us to rip into AI in the branding space, we would love to know what you would like us to answer in that space. But Josh, thank you so much for joining us today. And we're excited to have you back in again soon.
Mate, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.